Hey everyone, welcome to ZDS. This week I have Lara Newsom on the show. I feel very grateful to be able to share some of her stories with you on how she came up going to school for art and botany and has found herself in the front-end development world. Her story very closely parallels my own, so it was very refreshing for me to be able to share some of her story with all of y'all, and affirming that I'm not the only one that has gone through things in sort of a more roundabout way. Laura has a talk coming up this week at NGConf that I'm very excited to be able to go see, talking about reactive code, and I feel grateful that we're able to talk about reactive code a good bit in our conversation today as well. If you find yourself that you're enjoying the conversation and you're enjoying ZDS in general, please consider giving us a like and subscribe so we can continue to bring you lots of cool conversations going forward. And without any further ado, here is Laura. Hey everyone, welcome to ZDS 080. Super excited to have Lara Newsom here. Laura, we met each other on the Angular show way back when now,
Yes.
talking about Rxjs. And I said, I'd really like to have you on the show. And then months went by and I was like, I really need to have Laura on. And then now we've got NGConf coming up next week and we're both talking at it. So it seems like a really good opportunity to get you on and talk about who you are, what you do, and maybe get into some reactive stuff as well. So
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome. Can we maybe start with you? Can you tell us about your story? I'm always super interested when there's someone I know but don't really know to really know them.
Right.
To get to what makes you tick, how'd you get in the business, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. So. Yeah, definitely. So I'll start with my degrees because that's very confusing for people. I have a Bachelor of Science in Botany from Iowa State. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Painting from the University of Iowa, and a Master of Fine Arts in Art and Integrated Media from CalArts. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. And it turns out that I wasn't really interested in pursuing life as a botanist. And I thought, oh yeah, I'm going to be an artist. Like this is where the big bucks are. And so I went to CalArts. CalArts is a really great art school. And what I learned when I was there was that I didn't really like art as much as I thought I did. Okay. Because once you start really talking about it and tearing it apart and critiquing it, it's like everything seems stupid and nothing seems worthwhile. So I'm like, maybe I don't want to do art anymore.
Yeah.
But then
really interesting. I feel the way you describe art is kind of the way I feel about music sometimes.
Yeah. I think it's like critical thinking is it's a blessing and a curse, right? I'm so happy I'm able to do it. At the same time, like sometimes I wish I wasn't good at it because I'd love to not. I'd like to just be like, that's pretty. I like it. And I've gotten to the point now where I can say that's pretty. I like it, but
that's exactly where I'm at with music.
Yeah.
I liked music and I got into it. I felt like I was becoming a snob.
Right.
Instead of just enjoying things, I was like, oh, that's not good. That's not as good as the Beatles or something like that.
Right, exactly. Like, oh, that doesn't make sense compositionally, or you're like, oh, yeah. And then you feel guilty because you're like, I kind of like that song. And you're like, why? And then you hate yourself a little bit for liking it. And then you're like, no, but it's okay if I like it. And yeah, so you have all these internal battles. So I went through all of that with art. But so I graduated from CalArts in 2003, and my aunt was running a graphic design company in Los Angeles, and she needed a production artist. And so I started working for her, and what she also needed was a web developer, or actually a web designer, because I didn't really I did HTML and CSS and Flash.
Nice.
So I did a lot of Flash. I made this very elaborate action script interactive directory, where if you clicked food, it would show all the food things. And then, I had a lot of, I felt really proud of that thing because I had no training. I learned it all from literally a book, like a paper book. like we used to, right?
Yeah.
So
I don't know if you remember these. When I was growing up, the rage was about the books with the CDs in them.
yes,
Like
yes.
I was always like go to Barnes and Noble and feel like which has the best CD in terms of like what it's got on it. But
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, and this book I guarantee came with the CD. This is back when
nice.
Flash was still Macromedia.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I did so I had done some web design.
Yeah. Well, it
Just
seems
real
like you had some clear affinity for stuff from the project you described, and just like
yeah.
feeling invested and feeling proud of it. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah. Like
yeah.
it was really exciting. And I even went I made an app for another company. It was an architectural company that they could upload a Word doc. Like they
Uh-huh.
could edit a Word doc and it would change the content. Like it was like Flash
Nice.
content management.
Yeah, with Word.
Yeah. It was like it was too complicated for like the customer to end up using ever.
Oh
Like they
no.
could never remember how to use it, but
Oh
it worked. So, but yeah, I think I always was sort of drawn to the logic of programming, and
hmm.
when I was really little, I wasn't talented and gifted, and they always pushed basic. Like I know I wrote a lot of basic when I
Wow.
was a kid. Yeah. I
Okay.
didn't realize it until I was actually working as a software engineer, and I'm like, "Oh wait, I totally oh, they had us writing basic in elementary school like that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's what I was doing because I didn't really know what I was doing because I'd made some animation. I was into of course the graphics of it. So I made
Right.
a like very elaborate storyline where plot pointed out drawings and they'd move around and tell the
Yeah.
story and um
Well, that's very cool.
yeah,
Yeah,
and so
I was in our talented and gifted stuff growing up, and we didn't do any programming. It was
yeah.
all like reading books and stuff.
Yeah, it's I've noticed that it's changed. Like I have kids now that they went through the program in elementary school and I actually pulled them out because it basically just meant more homework. I'm like,
Yeah.
this isn't I don't see how this is helping them. Like this is
Yeah.
just and I think it's school to school, right? Like I think it
Hmm.
depends on who's running the program and
Yeah.
who's
Our
not.
boys, they had a program like I forget what it was called. I think it was maybe Eagles. They
Hmm.
called it here, but yeah, they really liked it there, and then they went to we had to change to a new school the year before COVID, and that one it was like you said, just more homework, and it's like,
Yeah.
what's the point?
Yeah, I'm
So
like, if I'm gonna give them more homework, I'll like put them in a class that's teaching them stuff that I think will be useful to them, right? So,
exactly, yeah.
but yeah, so to pick it up from Los Angeles, after I had been
Hmm.
working for my aunt, I left there in 2007, left Los Angeles, and came back to Des Moines. And then like the whole housing market crashed, and all the graphic designers in Des Moines got laid off, and I found myself sort of in this
Wow, that's crazy. So
shrinking job pool.
yeah, so you have 2007. That is so the housing bubble is bursting,
Yes.
and the dot-com bubble is just about to, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
So
fun
like
time to
yeah,
be an American, right?
exactly, exactly, exactly. Especially one that's
Coincidentally,
like
this is right when I'm graduating college the first time around too. So it's just like,
yeah, it's stressful, right?
yeah,
Because you're like you're watching your retirement money, like the $10,000 you've managed to save, like just
yeah,
disappear. And we were
yeah,
very lucky. We bought a house before the bubble crashed. Like
mm,
we moved at just the right moment. Like they
yeah,
literally gave me a house on my 3/4 time contract work.
yeah.
Like I bought the house.
Hmm.
Like this is ridiculous. Like no one should have given me a house, but whatever they did.
And
Which
then everything broke down, and
yes,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
Well, were you stuck kind of holding the bag for like a house that was evaluated really high, but now
Luckily,
wasn't
in Des
anymore?
Moines, that didn't happen.
Okay,
So the Des Moines market stayed fairly stable. I think we lost
okay,
like 10,000 in value on our house, and that was
okay.
it. So yeah,
That's not too bad compared
nothing
to
like
what
my
could have
friend.
happened.
Oh gosh, like I had friends in Los Angeles that were completely upside down.
Mm,
I couldn't
yeah,
even imagine. So,
yeah,
um, but
tough
yeah, so
times.
came back into that, and so I actually was running a sewing business for a while because I didn't know anybody in town professionally. And
Mm-hmm.
so getting another web design job was not happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so I picked up I had some freelance clients that I did work for. I did some web development for them. I did a little bit of I did some Shopify, I
Okay.
elaborated their Shopify shops and like that
Yeah,
kind
yeah.
of stuff. And then, I've been doing that for like 8 years and it was getting really old. Mostly it was the sewing because I was making custom like Christmas stockings for people and balls and all this like weird stuff. And people were really into it, but it's really, really annoying to deal with individual customers all the time.
Yeah.
Especially with their their perceived deadlines of when you should be doing their work. And it's like, okay, I'm super done with this. And then you pay taxes on top of all that. And I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
no. I can't do this anymore. And
Right.
I had a friend in St. Louis, Ben Gailey. He worked for this real small company and they needed a developer and they had a
Okay.
very small budget. And shockingly, they could not find a good developer for that very small budget.
Oh, I see. I see how it's going on here.
Weird how that works, right?
Yeah.
They were like, I don't want to do this job that I've been doing for 10 years for that much money.
Yeah.
And so he was like, I had done a little bit of freelance web design for them. And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
do you want to try to write some of the like server code? And I was like, sure. Why
Yeah.
not? Like it can't be as bad as being in the basement sewing all the time.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
so you said there was an 8-year gap here.
yeah.
Were you like still working on projects where you could
Yeah.
or okay.
Yeah. So like
Okay.
in the meantime, I did like I said, I was doing like HTML and CSS.
Okay.
I took a couple of like just brief online courses to brush
Okay.
up to HTML5 and CSS3.
Yeah.
I learned a little bit. I learned just enough about JavaScript and jQuery to be able to like make a jQuery uh, like component run
Right,
and stuff
right.
like that.
Okay.
Be like, look at this amazing like navigation bar I made, and I was so impressed
Yeah.
with myself. And
Yeah.
um,
Well, I remember when I first got it started with HTML, like back in, around, this must have been around 2005, 2003 or something like that. I was always thinking like, man, it would be nice to just like take that element over there, just move it here, have some
right,
reference to it. And it was like, it was components I was looking for. Right. And
right.
so when I first came across Angular, skip ahead to 2016, it was like, okay, this is that thing I was looking
Right.
for.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
So I really wanted jQuery to be that thing, but it was
yeah.
like it was not quite that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was good at like I was really good at like just climbing around the DOM tree. Like I can go grab this here and I can go put it over here. And like I was really good at that stuff, but
Query
it's
all the
also
things.
yeah, exactly. And it's like and the code is just like and I hadn't really so anyways, the other problem was that when I was working this job, I was the only developer there.
Okay.
And so I was like a brand new shiny green developer. My boss knew he was really good at working on their ASP.NET, like their ASP Classic, like the classic
Okay.
ASP. That's what I'm trying to
Yeah, yeah.
say. He was really good at working on that stuff. And I could read it, I could fix it, but of course, anything you made edits to on that was live on the production server.
Mm,
So you'd have to
that's
like,
fun.
you'd name the file old, and then if everybody complained, you'd rename it back to the right reference.
The original source management solution. Yes,
Yeah,
I'm familiar
exactly.
with this.
Yeah. And the whole folder is just littered with underscore old, underscore Tuesday,
Oh, yeah,
underscore old.
yeah. I remember both in college. So college, I remember. So this is the second time around college for me when I went for my computer science degree. First time around, I wasn't doing computer science. But the way me and my friends did source control, because like we tried Git, it was just like too hard. Like
Yeah.
what's going on with these merge conflicts? No one knows what's happening there.
Right.
We were so close, but we're like, clearly Git is garbage.
Right.
We just like,
we know better. We can
we have email chains mailing back and forth zip files
Nice.
with like the names like you were talking about. That was our source control. So
nice. Yeah.
they
did have Tortoise SVN, but they didn't have it set up for all of the all of the repositories, and no one really understood how it worked.
Yeah.
So eventually I had to figure out how that worked, which was actually a huge improvement, because then I could do like commit messages and like roll it back to specific commits. And I was like, wow, this source control thing is magic.
Yeah.
And
well, nowadays, like with VS Code and like with the GitLens plugin and stuff like that, it feels it's so nice to work with compared to, you know, what I had been doing.
Oh yeah, I really take it for, I think I take it for granted every day, just how easy it is now, and just how much better I've gotten. I was really intimidated by Git. Like, I totally understand what you're saying, because when I started with Source Allies, you know, of course, they're a modern company using GitHub for all of their repositories. And I didn't know Git. Like, I had an awareness of it, but I'd never like used it. And I feel like until you're in there using it on a daily basis, it's hard to really know like all your little tricks, right?
Yeah. And well, for us too, like we're doing this in like this must have been around 2015. My friends in college. So we had known stuff like Cloud Drive, or like the various things that were available at the time, like what was it, Bitbucket and stuff like this. So like just different ways of like passing files back and forth, but not in coding context.
Right.
So it was like Git wasn't involved, but we knew what we wanted, and we saw Git as a stumbling block to that thing we wanted. Instead, like, I don't know what it was. It was something like whenever we had merge conflicts, we're like, what is going on? Like, this is so dumb. I mean, how's that a conflict?
Right. Yeah. Especially when they're like white space conflicts, and you're like, white space, like, just figure it out. You're a computer, you're smart, right?
Yeah. Well, even to this day, I'm kind of surprised. Well, the diffs sometimes are like, why would you put it there?
Right.
It seems so obvious.
Yeah. When it's like, obviously that block of code is like exactly down here. Like, I added a new method. Just go look down here.
Like basic JSON stuff. It's like, we're going to take the closing one of the one above it and like half of that one, and then that's your diff. That's what you changed. You're like,
that still gets me. It still gets me every day, because it's like you go in and you clean it up, and you're like, did I get all the closures? Like,
Yep.
So, that. But anyways, So working at that company in St. Louis, they had a VB.NET web forms app for me to work on, and basically I was hired with the caveat of, if you can make this thing go in 6 months, we'll keep you. Nice. And I'm like, challenge accepted. And so I learned everything. I Googled all the things and wrote some really disgusting spaghetti code. And, but I got it working, and I wrote this like very elaborate ad hoc reporting system where you could upload literally almost any Word doc or Excel document, and it would retain its formatting. It would retain whether or not files were hidden, or like columns were hidden. It would find the column that had the customer ID in it, because it wasn't always in the same spot, and it wasn't always named the same thing, but it always had the same format. And then it would append the things you wanted on it and spit it back out. And so they had a job that would run to do that before, and it would take like 20 minutes. And so my app took like less than a minute.
Okay.
And that thing lives in production to this day.
Awesome.
And it's gross. It's so gross. It's like a Christmas tree of logic, and like, but it works. And I hope to God no one ever has to touch it, because they will curse my name.
I have projects still out in production at previous companies. I assume they're still out in production, but I'm just like, I hope no one has to deal with that, because I know the people that will probably have to deal with that. Like, former friends, or hopefully still friends. They will be former friends if they have to maintain.
I know, you're like, no, don't judge me. I was so young and green, and
I was just learning Angular.
I was a baby when I wrote that.
I know.
So
when in reality, it's only like 4 years ago or something like that.
I know. Honestly, sometimes I come into code that I wrote last month, and I'm like, what is this garbage? And I'm like, Git blame. It was me. Maybe I just merged it. Maybe I wrote it.
That was definitely. Yeah, I've had that phenomenon happen many times.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's the permanent state of being a developer is like
Mhm.
we're constantly growing, right? But that means that we can constantly be ashamed of what we wrote before.
Yeah.
But so
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
and after I would say after that project, I told them I was no longer going to write in VB because everything I had to Google for Visual Basic
Mhm.
would come back. The answer was always in C sharp. So I learned C sharp at the same time as Visual Basic. So
Okay.
I'm like, there's no reason for you to keep writing in Visual Basic if you're going to be doing new applications. Like you're going to
Right.
have a harder time finding another developer writing in Visual Basic
Right.
when you could move all this stuff to C sharp MVC. And so I moved to that, and that's when I found Angular and was like, oh gosh, this makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Like I see a lot of parallels between the two. And I think that's why I understand Angular the way I do is because of how I understand like the MVC pattern with C sharp.
Yeah, that's
So
super cool. I've long thought that there is like this section of the Angular community that's not getting well reached, which is the section you're describing, which is like .NET developers or
mhm.
people working on the back end in various like OOP languages who like gravitate towards Angular because it makes sense. Like the
Yeah.
models match up, and
Hmm.
TypeScript is very close to C sharp in some ways,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it seems like a very easy transition. I so personally, step before Angular was working exclusively in Java.
Yeah.
And so going to Angular was like, it felt very natural, but it also felt freeing in that you
Yeah.
throw an any on there and it's just like turn off types checking a little bit.
Right.
So
At least till you get it working and then I can figure out what type it is or whatever.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And it's got like dependency injection. Like I've actually been working on a React app for the last year and I'm like, there's so many things where I'm like, this would be so much easier in Angular. And you know,
Yeah.
and of course then everyone rolls their eyes at me and they're like, no, that's not true. And I'm like, I don't know, you guys. It's starting to feel like every day it feels more true to me. But
Mm-hmm. That's how I felt. So I spent a stint really trying to get into React. I think it was in January of this year, and for the personal project I was working on, it was like, well, I really want to do this in React so I can learn it. And there's
sure.
just so many like small things that would pop up that I knew exactly how to solve in Angular, but it was
Yeah.
like it was very difficult to figure out in React. And I'm sure a lot of that was familiarity, but there's
Yeah.
also some parts of it where it's just like if your whole model is around, rendering the DOM based on you know your tree of components or your tree of callbacks, really, I guess it's like so there are some there's some things about that I don't know how to hack.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure people who are familiar with it do, but yeah.
Yeah.
Angular maybe probably just from familiarity was like, okay, boom, got it.
Yeah, I know what to do with this. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I understand how this is working. And to be fair to React, I haven't done the like deep dive, get into the docs, read every
yeah.
page. I haven't given it that fair shake, but
Mhm.
um I can say that I think it's very easy to write very terrible React. It's also very easy to write very terrible Angular. I've seen
Yeah,
it.
very true.
Um, but I feel like with the very terrible Angular, I have a better chance of figuring out what it's doing.
Hmm.
Whereas like if you've got React where it's got like hooks and Redux and Apollo and it's using like context here and there, it's like, oh, what is happening? Like
Yeah,
where is any of this happening?
interesting. Yeah,
So
I feel like there are parts of React that I think do lend to better architecture in general. Like just
mhm.
how I feel like with Angular there is a certain amount of buy-in that comes with a component, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
each component is actually a DOM node,
Yes.
which is not true in React. Which was like that was the most unsettling thing for me at the beginning. Was like, wait, what,
What?
what's
What are
going
you
on?
talking about?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like how do I even debug this? What's going on?
Yeah.
Where does one component start and the other one stop? And then I
Yeah.
was like, oh, but wait, that's kind of nice. Like really, it's not components. It's about functions returning the TSX, and then
Yeah.
like if you can lean into that pattern where you like like for in general, I think Angular, the presentational component, I'm often very skeptical of. Like, why would I do that? Why would I not just add some more HTML or stuff into my template to cover
Sure.
that issue rather than like breaking it out into its own little box? Whereas React, there's none of that friction exists. I don't think I would, because you can essentially inline that component if it's as simple as I'm driven by my inputs.
Yeah.
Then it's like, okay, I'll inline that maybe even inside of this component and
Right.
get that one out. But like with Angular, it's like, well, am I polluting the DOM tree? Do I really need to make this a component? Could this just be an ng template section somewhere in my template? That kind of stuff. So,
yeah.
I don't know.
It's interesting. I'm glad I've had the time working in a React app to kind of compare and contrast because, you know, I think it's good. I actually understand parts of Angular better because of what I've learned from React and vice versa. And I can't tell you how many times like there'll be something wrong with the app we're on, and they're like, "Well, what do you guys think's going on?" I'm like, "Well, if it was Angular, this is it would be this."
At my old school,
at my old school, the kids would have been like, "It's this."
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like I think that anytime you can pick up another framework, it really just deepens your framework or library, if you will. It deepens your knowledge of
your compendium of knowledge.
Exactly.
I'm partial to RPGs myself, and like it always feels like every opportunity for work is a way to level up.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, that's sort of my my long story short, my short story long. I don't know. I took a very backwards route to software engineering.
Yeah.
And I think what I liked about it is that I like to solve problems, like a lot. Like my favorite thing is when somebody tweets out a problem and I'm like, ooh, I want to solve this, you know?
Yeah.
I may not get the right answer for them because I might not understand their whole question or their whole problem, but you know, it's like, it's fun to be like, here's a problem, go find out what's wrong with it. Like I love debugging code. I like, I can't say I like fixing broken code, but then I'm thinking about days where I'm like, I'm going to go for a never ending, I'm just going to go for a walk and never come back.
Yeah.
You know? But I think there's a lot more days where I feel like my brain is more satisfied by the work that I'm doing than it ever has been before.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's always so many layers that you can peel off and learn from, you know, like I finally got to work on a project using Kubernetes and Helm and, you know, like setting up the build pipeline. And it's like all this stuff. It's like just these little things. And some of them are very specific to the project, but it's still, you know, it's just still knowledge that you get to have. And, you know,
do you ever feel like there's some friction between wanting to learn something new, like Kubernetes, like you said, like that's always a draw versus like just wanting to do with what you understand? Does that ever rise up for you? Okay, cool. That happens to me a lot. That's why I'm asking. So
yeah.
Like, I know I want to do the new thing because I want to continue to grow in that area. Like there's almost like two dimensions to growth. It's like there's the depth, how deep you can go in any one thing, but there's also like the breadth of knowledge, like how many different things do you understand?
And I think the hard part is finding that balance. Like at some point you got to go deep, right? Like if you only understand everything an inch deep all the way across, then you're, you know, it's like you're only going to accomplish so much. And so it's like, and I think sometimes those deep spikes happen inadvertently. Like, I'm unfortunately very good at Visual Basic, right? Like, because I've maintained enough legacy apps that I'm like, okay, listen, guys, okay, this is what you do, you know, or like, I know how to manage an IIS server, you know, it's like totally not very useful anymore, but like, it's still useful because people still need that, you know? So it's like, but that's the knowledge you just kind of like, you have back here and it's like, okay, I know how to do that.
I feel there's like some patterns in those things too.
There are.
Like when I first started my professional career, we used Apache Tomcat, I think it was, like for And I was like, I haven't touched that since. But the things I learned from dealing with that, like, was a lot of shell
Yes.
commands, a lot of different things that were like helpful, that have continued to be helpful elsewhere.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
hadn't thought that when I was doing it. I was like, well, this will be helpful if I ever do Apache Tomcat again. But now it's like, oh, actually, the same principles apply everywhere. Just
and you learn like enough vocabulary that you can Google the next problem, and it's like it totally. Yeah, I think what I learned with I actually had to write the security policies for our IIS servers at one of my old jobs because they went through a big security audit, and so I learned all kinds of crazy stuff about HTTP requests and like, denial of service attacks and like all this like security stuff that I wasn't gonna get just being on the code side of it, and I think it's really important on the code side of us for us to know that. And I think they really try to make us, like, depending on the company, like they'll put you through the security training when they're like, go through this hackadoo thing. And it's like, but until you're really like invested in it.
Yeah, those can be kind of fun. Like I remember something where like we were hacking old MySpace and stuff like that. Yeah. That was kind of neat to see. Like, at the very least, it's like it gave me that pattern of, okay, this is the kind of things we want to think about just in the back of our heads. Is there any way around this? I feel like it's not that far removed from the stuff we do already, right? Like, in some ways, when we make a new feature, it's like, how do we hack that system? But we have like full access, like
right.
Given full access, how do we expand on this?
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it's like, how much can you learn? I was reminded the other day how much I love just going into your website and console logging this in the dev tool, like in the console, like console log this. What's in here? Look, it's our entire Apollo cache. Like, hey guys, did you know? Just so you know, be careful with what you put in there. And it's like that kind of stuff I think is really interesting. I actually had to hack into, at my old job, they had bought a component and it wasn't open source, and we needed to hook off of, they needed to be able to search every single file in this thing, and it was only letting them do it by directory. And so I had to hook into it somehow. And that was like probably the most fun I've ever had at work, because it was like, first of all, I had to figure out how to hack into it. Mm-hmm. And from their like minified code, and it's like, okay, this is how I'll get in there. And then I got it working, and it, I just felt like I could, get into the Pentagon or something at that point, which totally not true, but
for any FBI people watching, she totally doesn't mean it.
I know. I literally just console log this. That's all, you guys. Like, don't.
Oh yeah. What was it? Me and my wife were looking at something. I think it was like a bank statement or something like that, and I was like, I'm just gonna bump this up here, like just getting into the DOM and like changing it.
Yes.
It's like I don't know. Every time I see someone like with a screenshot of a tweet, I think the same thing. I'm like, this is super sketch. But I feel like the screenshot in general in social media has a lot of weight. Like, especially if they have that check, what was like the verified thing. It's like,
oh, they obviously said this. There's no way anyone could have faked this. I mean, like, first of all, you could do it in straight Photoshop, but aside from that, because you might not get the font right. Even easier, just get into the DOM. I actually, when I like to do career days with kids, like middle school kids, and whenever I do that, the first thing I do is I'm like, all right, open up Chrome, and now let's open up the dev tools, and we're going to start hacking this website. And we go through and we make all these changes, and they're like, we're doing it, we're hacking this website. I'm like, now hit refresh, and they're like, aw. I'm like, yeah, because that's how the HTTP request works, right? Like, you're only manipulating what's on the client side here. But I have been able to hack a few. So like if your kids are in camps, I have been able to hack into camp registration sometimes because of the URL parameters. So you can, like, if you strip off enough of them, you can get the main listing, and then you can get into, you can find all of them instead of just one or two. So
nice. I've had a little bit of that. Nothing that exciting as what you're describing, but like I have done some interesting things around like Selenium scripts for when my wife had this thing. It was called like Well Dressed Wolf when our girls were littler. It was like these dresses that were like it was a very weird microcosm. Like they were extremely exclusive, and they would go on sale, and they'd like go on sale, and then 5 minutes later they were all sold out.
Right.
And so it was like people were sitting on this, like waiting to go. And so I wrote this Selenium script to like bump us to the front of the line. It's like,
Nice.
no way, you're clicking this faster than my script.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
I feel like that's what's going on with the COVID, like all the COVID vaccines.
I thought about that. I actually hadn't done that with the COVID stuff. But,
yeah, I was lucky enough to get one, but
yeah,
well,
I just got my first one
okay.
last week. So.
Excellent. Yeah, my second one, I just got it Friday, and I was tired yesterday, but I feel pretty good today. So fingers crossed that
very good,
going well.
Did the first one throw you at all?
The first one, it was like I had like a 24-hour delay before I started to feel like garbage.
That's how I felt too. That's interesting.
Yeah.
It wasn't the night after I got the shot. The night after that, I had like crazy dreams.
Oh yeah, like really weird ones.
Yeah, and I was thinking in the back of my head the whole time, I wonder if this is about the vaccine. Like while I was in the dream, like clearly this is weird.
I've got this alien DNA in my body right now. I wonder what's happening.
Yeah, it's very close to what I was thinking. It was like this alien's technology that they just injected me with is opening my mind to the other dimensions.
That's right. I'm like in the Marvel universe. Right. They've injected us with Terrigen crystals.
So. I don't get that reference.
You're not nerdy enough then.
I'm sorry.
We've been watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So my kids are very big Marvel universe. Well, at least one of them is super into Marvel universe. And so yeah.
Well, we had been watching everything up to I think we've seen all the movies up to the what was it? The big one where they defeat Thanos.
Endgame.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel so nerdy that I'm like, and that was Endgame.
That was so cool though. Like I grew up on some comics, like not a lot, but some. But there was something really cool about like the mini series that would break off from the main storyline.
Yeah.
The bringing everything together, like I felt like I saw all of those elements play out in the cinematic universe thing, where like these random other stories would show up in like TV shows or in other movies. You kind of have to like watch them all, but they weren't like strictly like serial. So
yeah, you could get by if you didn't watch all of them, but yeah.
In my case, if I was too cheap to buy all of them,
right?
But yeah. And then seeing all those things come together towards the end, that was very satisfying. I think they did that very well.
Yeah. I've enjoyed it. There's enough of them that's like you can kind of, like when you read through a whole book series, like I remember like reading through Harry Potter and getting to the end and being like sort of bummed that I lost my best friends. Because you get to the end and you're like, oh, we just spent so much time together.
And now you all graduated college and everyone went their own ways.
Yeah, and all I get to know is that it's like on the Facebook update, like, oh yeah, they had a baby. And
that's really weird. I feel like that's exactly like a lot of my relationships from college.
Exactly. You're like, oh, okay, so you have a house now. Oh, that's cool. And your baby. Okay. Cool beans.
Very nice. Yeah. Well, but before we get like too far down, one of these episodes, maybe we can bring it back to maybe we can talk about Rxjs a little bit, because that's like that's our backstory. That's how we met each other.
That's right. Yeah.
Talk I guess we did about Rxjs, and we both have like similar solo episodes since then.
And I learned so much from yours. It was so great. Like,
oh, cool.
Like I totally loved all the just all the little tidbits you threw in there, because it was like, oh yeah, because I not to like jump the gun here, but my my ng conf talk is about switch map and merge map, concat map, and exhaust map.
Okay.
And like when you mentioned
4 different sides of the one coin kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so there were things that you said in your episode that I'm like, oh, that'd be like really good information to include here.
Okay. So like switch mapping to a promise and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it was actually when you were talking about that they can take any observable like, or like an array, or because I totally forget that. And I remember early on using those and realizing, like trying to figure out why, if I didn't wrap, like if I was using one of those like switch map or merge map and I didn't wrap it in an observable like either passing it to another observable or whatever, that if it was a string, it would just spit out all the letters. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, what is happening? This is so weird.
So my initial thing with this was NGRX, right? So you had the effects. Are you familiar? Okay, cool.
Yes, yeah. So I love NGRX. Like, it is like, when people are like, it's so hard, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, they've made it so, I don't think they could make it any easier, but maybe it's just because I haven't had enough trouble with it, you know, but anyway.
No, I feel like I saw one video on like the pattern. So I was like completely unfamiliar with Redux when I came into NGRX. I was like, okay, actions, reducers, selectors. Got it.
I'm like, getters and setters, you guys. It's like you got your setter, which is your reducer. You got your getter, which are your selectors. I mean, I realize it's different, but it's like, and it just mapped it. I'm like, oh, that works.
there were such easy, like not easy, simple components. Like actions, you really get into an action. Like you do whatever. Back in the day, it was like you created your class for it, was like totally overkill versus like now the create action.
Oh my gosh, the creator functions are like,
so much nice.
Just use those.
I feel like it really gets into like what's great about JavaScript stuff too. But anyways, like at the end of the day, that action is an object. Like that's all it is. It's an object, and it's like serializable. It's just data, data there. Your reducer is just like a function that takes one state and takes in an action and produces new state. Yeah. That's it.
Make it pure. Like, just make it pure. That's your only boundary. Like, exactly. No side effects.
And then the selector is simply a function that takes your current state and returns you some piece of data from that. And that's like, that's all it is at the core of things. I think when you get into effects, it gets a little more intimidating. But I think that's when also the possibilities start opening up for people. Because like the way I think of apps in general is like, I think this is happening regardless, and you can just kind of tap into this if you want. I always feel like the closer your implementation is to what's actually happening, the better off you are. So that's why I always like reach for this from the start. But like really what's happening is as you dispatch, you're creating an observable of your actions. And that's the big thing, in my opinion, that effects gives you, is an injectable stream of that actions, right? So it's just like, I always talk about observables in terms of timelines. It is one timeline of all of the actions occurring in your app from start to finish. And really, when you think of that, okay, so it's like it's this timeline with all these actions happening sporadically. You don't really know the order they're going to happen before they happen, but you do know all you have to do is like take that action stream and map it to your reducer, and then you have the observable of your state. And that's just that store injectable that you injected before. And it's like, oh, all this together. Like, and then all you have to do, if everything's in this world, all you have to do literally is take that store and like spit out HTML from it. Yeah. That's all it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think the day I realized that you could trigger a reducer and an effect with an action, like when I was like, oh, you could trigger more than one effect with an action. Like, oh, like, oh my God, like, and it's literally like a play. I think of it like a play. It's like your action stream is like, that's the play, right? And then you're setting up these scenes or characters that happens when their action happens, right? Like when you see this, you do this, you know, and it's like, okay, I'm doing my thing. And then it spits out its thing, and then we're good. And, you know, it's like,
well, like the whole of functionality, I think, can be encompassed by that pattern. Like after you throw in effects, it's like, okay, so not only can actions like with that core loop, the actions to reducers to selectors, you can like you can do all of your state management, but there's nothing to key off of other events. Like if you try to get like you're talking about, you want to keep side effects out of that core loop. Yeah, because if you start bringing stuff in, it's not this closed system anymore. It's this weird. It gets to be this weird junky thing that's not all that different from everything else we've written our entire lives. Right. But exactly. But the effects gives you that way of managing that and saying, actually, well, between that core loop of here's your state and here's how we move from state to state. And also in your effects, you can trigger off of anything that happens. Doesn't even have to be an action necessarily. It could be any observable. Like you could trigger right off of router events too, if that's not in your store. Just start with anything, and you can now like create a self-perpetuating machine. Yeah. That once it's there, you're like, okay, done.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And that's I think that's what I really appreciate. I think that's what I really appreciate about it. It was like it just really made the team I was on, they fought me about putting effects in because they're like, they're really hard, and I'm like, but they're like the gravy on the potatoes. Let's like like why wouldn't we do this? Like this
and
is
it's so cryptic. Like you look at that Rxjs code in the effects. I remember being like, oh man, like this is good. Here we go again. We have to learn something new today. But like, I don't know, having spent the time in it, it's like those things, it's so much clearer to me. The person, whoever wrote that, even if it's past Zach from like 2 years ago, it's so clear what my intentions were from that code.
Exactly. It's so much cleaner, and just being able to, honestly, to me, it reminds me a lot of like Link in C#, because they're similar, right? They're both lazy, right? Like a Link statement doesn't get called until you actually doesn't run until you call it. So like an observable.
I'm not super familiar with Link. I seem to recall it's like some declarative type of code for interacting with databases. Is that right?
Yeah. So basically, the ways I've used it, it's usually like database queries. You can merge sets together. Like it's really good at merging lists together more performantly. Like, because you can
pass in like actual SQL statements to it?
Sort of ish. Yeah, it kind of depends on like in Visual Basic it's uglier, but in C# it's a little more SQL-y. And so basically you kind of just set up these, I always think of them as like machines. Like you set up this little machine that's gonna run when you need it. And so like once you need it, it runs and it does its work and it spits out the thing you need, right? And so that's how I kind of think of Rxjs.
Machines are exactly the word I use for this, by the way. It's like just because like by comparison, like the alternative was like we'd get these bug reports, right? And it would be like, well, we didn't account for this case. That's what most of our bug reports turned into. And so we'd have to, in like an imperative way, like using imperative code in Angular combined with like just, understood that the Angular change detection is going to run. It was always like, okay, we need to add more code onto this, like to account a whole another set of code to account for this one state that we didn't anticipate would happen, but we're running into problems with it. Whereas, so it's like, it wasn't a machine we were building. It was like a list of instructions that like broke down once you hit a certain situation, versus like this machine that you could just add a function in here, add a function somewhere in that pipe. And now that state you hadn't expected was, well, first of all, it's harder to miss them, I feel like, with observables. But if you happen to miss them, it's like, well, it's like maybe just map it this way in this case or that way in the other case or something like that.
They really clicked with me. It was, I think, probably the thing I liked the most about Angular. It was the thing that my teammates hated the most about Angular, because they're just like, we don't understand the difference between all these things. And I'm like, just go read them. But I get it, like it's I think it's that the time function, like the time that throws people off, because it's like, and actually I had to redo one little section of my talk because I had forgotten about time, and I think it's easy to forget about time. And then you're like, oh, but time, it's like time is like another player in the play, right? Like if time walks in, then this happens,
I think that's like such a core part of like the way I understand Rxjs. And it's interesting because a lot of the other people in that community, I feel like, I had a talk with Ben Lesh a little while ago on this show, and just other talks with people around stuff in general about Rxjs. It feels like the way they tend to talk about it is so much more mechanical than
Yeah.
in my understanding. Where my like, I understand the mechanics, but the way I think about it is much more abstract. Like it's just timelines. That's all that's going on. And
Yes.
operators are just like ways of it's just a function to take one timeline and create a new timeline from it. That's very basically all I think about most of the time. And then from there it's just like, okay, let me Google the best way to get from this one timeline I want to the timeline I need. And then from Googling it often enough, you kind of just like remember a lot of those.
Yeah,
so, definitely. Yeah. So
we're doing like a podcast about the operators.
Yeah. I know. I was like, okay. So when we were doing those podcasts, I was like, I literally had Chrome open in another browser just to like be able to pull things up and try and ask me about it. I was like, okay, that one looks like this.
Yep, exactly. Because there's, and I think that's the thing that I think that's the one thing, if I had to sell something about Rxjs to people, is that you don't have to learn all the operators. Like you could literally just know one. Just learn map, right? Like even just knowing map, you can make your day easier, right? And so today I learned map. Tomorrow I'm going to learn tap. You could probably learn tap and map on the same day, right? Like
how about that?
They rhyme, it makes sense, and so it's like, if you just like, you can just kind of pick up these these operators as you go along, and some of them are almost going to never be used because they're just, I'm not sure why some of them exist, right?
Yeah. Well, I think
so they exist for a reason.
Yeah.
I don't know what that reason is.
I think it was Ben who did this. I remember, I think this was like years ago now, but there was something going around where they asked people how many, like just run the script. It'll tell you how many operators you're actually using. And most people, it came down to like a handful. Was between, like, there was 5 that were taking up the majority of the occurrences. And then there was maybe like a couple random ones from there. So like every once in a while I'll reach for buffer or buffer count or some obscure one like
random one. Yeah. You're like, oh, hey, check this out. When I use this one, boom. It does exactly what I wanted it to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But like it's between like mapping and like the 4 you're doing your talk on for ngconf, it's like you between those ones you can probably get most of the places you want to go. And it's like, it's I don't know. It seems extremes. It seems like something with a very difficult buy-in at the start. That seems really intimidating to someone who's not familiar with the domain. But once that initial investment is made, I feel like there's so many gains that are possible from it. And also, like, one of the biggest things I think I've come to realize about Rxjs is how much it opened up JavaScript to me and showed me how powerful JavaScript as a language really is. The ability in this one domain, like this big domain of JavaScript, to say, okay, we can actually do like very, very like closely related to OOP patterns, like old school kind of stuff, or you could go like fully into functional. Or you could just like easily switch back and forth between those, and there's foot guns around that. But if you know what you're doing, like, you can really leverage all those things together, and it can become like, I don't know. I feel to me the attraction of computer science work or development work, whatever you want to call it, has always been like, in the world of atoms, I have very little control over what actually happens. Versus in the world of bits, I'm like, I feel like a magician, like manipulating the world around me. And JavaScript, I feels like there's so little friction between being able to do that, like grabbing a different palette. And to the point where you'd think like I'm like the switches in my brain is like as if I was switching to a different language. But it's all in the same playground. It's all in the same box. It's all in the same runtime. And that's I don't know, that seems, I always get excited about that.
Oh yeah. Like, I feel like, okay, to make a painting analogy, right? Like, JavaScript for me is like abstract painting. Like, I can just like, I can go out, I can get, like, if I want to use like newspaper on there. I can go get some of that and put it on here. I can go put like, I'm not limited to a specific palette. I'm not limited to a specific style. Whereas like something like Java, like I feel like, well, you're going to end up with a painting that kind of looks like this, right? But like JavaScript, who knows what your painting is going to look like, right? Like, and it might be horrible. But
we've all had our stinkers.
I know, like we've all learned from our horrible code, I'd like to think. So
well, I think there's definitely potential for stinkers in other languages too.
Oh yeah, I've seen some.
Oh yeah, I've written stuff. So.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah. Oh gosh, we found this one method that somebody named colonoscopy, and it was a date formatter. So it would take in a string and it would look for a colon, and if it had a colon, it would format it as a date.
Okay.
And I'm like,
are you sure it wasn't just like? Are you sure it was colonoscopy and not something like colon on copy?
Nope, it was colonoscopy.
Okay.
Because we showed it to the whole team. We're like, what is this? Oh yeah, because it was in the legacy code and it was like buried way deep in one of the utility functions, and we're like, okay. And here's your lesson today on naming.
Yeah.
Although I think they hit the mark on what they were trying to accomplish there.
Yeah.
Like we didn't really care if we knew what the method did. What they wanted us to do is have a good laugh about it. And that did indeed happen. So.
Mission accomplished.
Nailed it, guys.
Hashtag nailed it. Well, yeah, that's so cool. Well, let me go down this path just a little bit. And it's something I've been curious about other people's interpretations on it. So Rxjs and React. Because you're working in React currently, as you had mentioned. Did you find? I find that. Well, I just think that in React, it seems like hooks are in a framework that is very like not domain specific. Hooks become actually very domain specific reactivity. I feel like versus Rxjs is more generic reactivity. I feel like.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm curious if you tend to agree with that as someone who's maybe had their hands more in React recently.
I can say I've had a really hard time convincing anybody to put Rxjs in our React app.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's plenty of use cases for it. But then it's like, but are there, because it's like there really isn't dependency injection. There isn't like there's just kind of there's a lot that I don't understand about React that has made me hesitant to just like slam it in there. Also because everybody has been just smashing stuff into this code base for years already. So
the Smash Burger restaurant, do you have those out there?
Yes, we do.
They just like put stuff in the meat and they smash it up.
Smash it up and they're like, here's some more toppings. They're like, oh, what I hear is you need more toppings. And so you get this like, we've got a very big stacked up burger, but so I've been hesitant to put it in for that. I've been able to work it into a couple of our Node APIs and like little projects. I'm trying to teach them. I'm like, this is good. Promise all is kind of annoying, you guys. Like, maybe we don't need promises everywhere. Like, so it's a hard sell, I think.
I do think like async await. I really enjoyed that syntax actually. Just in terms of how it can take something that is asynchronous or potentially asynchronous and just like flatten it out to understand it in a single chain of events. And so I don't know. I feel like a lot of my evolution through like being really into observables is understanding like promises really do have their place still. Like it's not a replacement in my opinion. I don't think it's a replacement for like promises. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I was like, I feel like there are definitely places though, however, where I feel like promises are just not quite cutting it. It's like, it'd be a lot easier if we just like, if we just did it this way, like maybe there's a better way than, And honestly, it's the promise all thing for me where I'm thinking about like we have a cache where we have to go and grab a bunch of things from the cache. And I'm like, I don't know.
So promise all, I think, is powerful when you actually want to use promise all. But I think a lot of times it's used where you don't actually want promise all. Like you don't actually want all these things. Like in some ways, it's like you don't have that many tricks in your bag. Like you can promise all, you can just chew one after another. It's very hard to compose like, well, these two depend on this one and this one depends on this one, and like situate them properly that way. I think it's probably possible. It's just those are the kinds of things, and maybe this is what you're getting to too, where like observables could really shine in terms of composing that machine very precisely.
Yes.
This is exactly how I want this to happen. And I feel like there's performance improvements on that as well. Whereas before you're waiting for all those things to complete, where you really just wanted some subset of them to finish.
Yeah. Like with my cache example, we get null values, right? Because we're just looking to see if it's in the cache. Right. And so then once we get all the promise alls back, we got to run it through a method that strips out all the nulls. Yeah. And I'm like, if it was an observable, I could just strip out the nulls and you'd see that that's what it's doing. You wouldn't have to go to another method, and then that's what you would have. And ta-da, like it just, I feel like it's just so much more like, see, I'm going to go get each one from the cache. And then when I get it, I'm going to check and see if it's null. And if it is, I'm going to filter it out and then I'm going to return, it's like, so that's an example where I'm like, that would be so much easier. But then it's just I'm like, maybe TDI time is going to be that. Technically, tomorrow's TDI time, so maybe that's happening tomorrow. But
what was TDI? Sorry.
Tech debt and innovation.
Okay.
So I am very fortunate to work for a client who values tech debt and innovation time, which I think they really honestly need to, because they do manage several pretty heavy legacy apps. And then they've also introduced a lot of shiny new things. And so I think it's been good for us to be able to go in and take the time and be like, you know what, I'm going to just go in and improve all the logging in this one API. And I actually did that with the API that is my baby. And I was able to realize that I had a consumer that is just abusing that. I mean, it's sending a request for each value of the array, but it's sending it's the array and then they push to the array. So it's like 1 and then 2 and then 3 and then 4. And I'm like, no, you guys are killing our performance. And so I've been able to find, it's like the better logging time that I took has really revealed a lot of these problems. And so, I think that it's such a vital part of managing software, especially for companies with, honestly, not even just legacy apps, like just apps in general, because we don't always nail it the first time. And so it's having that space to go back and reflect and improve and grow, I think is really important. So
very cool.
And it saves money because honestly, we were running 3 pods on that API, and I went in and made some changes. Now we're running 2, so it's like we're using less resources. We're saving money, right?
Yeah, objectively, this is better.
Yes. Right? Yes.
Yeah. So that's always cool to see. I feel like there's like the perpetual struggle in some cases between the business needs and the tech needs. And
yes.
It's nice to see. It's always very encouraging to see when you have a good marriage of the two, and kind of like what you're describing, I feel like. So. Yeah,
definitely. And I think you could complain about any company, but I mean, if you give me a little bit of tech debt time, I'll be like, okay, that's cool. I'll take these 2 days of tech debt time a sprint and like just make the best of them. So
very cool. Well, going back to Rxjs and React, any places where you've seen that Rxjs really help in React? Maybe.
I just honestly, I haven't been able to get it in. Like, but
that's how I feel. I mean, in general, the places where I use Rxjs and Angular is in effects, number 1, or inside like the internals of a component, number 2.
Yeah.
I think the insides of a component, like number 2, is in general moot in React. Like the use reducer, I think, does all of that in a way that's kind of more native to React and, in my opinion, more domain specific, but still like it gets the job done. It would almost seem like to me, it would almost seem like you were just smashing things in for the sake of smashing things in if you introduced Rxjs into that cycle.
And that's how I feel. I feel like there's maybe a few, maybe I could probably smash it into a few of the services, but I'm like, I also don't own a lot of those, so I'm like, are they going to be real happy if somebody from another team comes in, puts Rxjs in their service, and then runs away and laughs? Like, probably not. Enjoy your marble testing.
Marble testing is awesome.
Oh, I love marble testing, but other people do not. Like, people that don't get marble testing do not love it.
Okay.
They deeply do not love it.
They need to learn to love it because it's awesome. It's the timeline.
Really great. It is. You get to define your little timeline, and then you get to say what timeline you think it's going to spit out, and then you get to see if you're right.
Yeah. But I don't know. It's like for me the marble diagrams are an essential part for most of my observable code I write, because I've learned to not trust myself, especially around interesting combinations of switch map, merge map, and etc. Because sometimes you think it's going to go one way and you are wrong.
You're wrong. Yeah.
So it's very important. I think test-driven development, I think, is hard for me to buy into, but observables, I very easily go directly to that. Set up my test. This is like we were talking about, like the higher level pieces of the abstract thinking. What's going on here? Here's the observable I'm starting with. Here's the observable I want. Yeah. I am going to write a test that makes sure before I even implement it, this operator is going to take me from that one to this one.
Yes.
And I'm going to keep working on that until all my tests go green, and then I'll be happy.
Yep. Right? Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense there. I'm kind of with you on TDD. Sometimes I love it. Other times I'm like, this is slowing me down. Yeah. I think part of it is that, especially if it's something I'm kind of stabbing at, like it's hard to stab at TDD.
For listeners who may not be familiar, TDD is test-driven development, where you're it's very much write your test first. Like, don't even implement anything. Just get your interfaces out, write your tests, and then make your test go green, and then iterate on that.
Yeah, red, green refactor is what we always yell loudly. Write it red, fails tests, make it pass, then make it pretty. So,
yeah.
Or pretty, sure. Performant, whatever, both, they're the same thing.
Same thing. Yeah. Beauty is, it spans many dimensions.
It does.
So, but I don't know. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. I would love to see TDD. I feel like TDD has been the importance of testing has been, and the value of testing by engineers has been growing over time. Mm-hmm. And I would love to see that continue to the point where we have tools around it that make it very viable.
Yes.
Whereas now I worry about that viability. I think some tools like Cypress are getting really close, but still you're in this scenario where if you're interacting with a bunch of APIs that maybe are very intertwined, you really need to get all the whole stack in there to get easy TDD out there. So
and even then, we've got this one API that depends on an external vendor, and about once a month they wipe out our dev data. And so we have to go ask for it back. But in the meantime, it completely blocks, it's a blocker because all of our acceptance tests start failing. And then, the client I'm working for, we've got one API they need to pull it out. It's in a GraphQL API. It's federated into this. It's not federated. It's in this one GraphQL API. And so all of the acceptance tests have to pass before that thing can get released to prod. And unfortunately, our API is in there as well. And so if our API is failing because our friendly third-party vendor has knocked out our dev data, then this very vital API can't get out. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, so obviously we need to decouple those two because this is not okay. But it's like you set yourself up for those like that's where like testing is wonderful, because it's like, yay, it's green. I know, I feel relatively confident that I can put this in prod and it's not going to blow up. But if something goes wrong in that pipeline, you end up in this situation where you either have to override the pipeline, or you have to do what I did, whereas you just go in and skip all the tests for your failing API. But then you got to remember to go unskip them, and so it's a catch 22.
I totally get that. I wonder if, to me, it seems like sometimes the pipelines themselves are criminally unmaintained, and that kind of makes these kinds of things very easy to happen. Whereas it would be much nicer. Well, it's down to like maybe putting even pipelines aside, down to the architecture of our code, getting to a point where things are easy to like to test all the way through. Just like breaking out maybe an Angular ng module, putting it into like this ng module is obviously specific to your app, like your golden app up there, but maybe just take that module and see if we had the tooling to take that module, throw it into a completely different app, and just like make sure everything else it needs is in there, and just like test that in isolation. It's like I think there's a lot of power there. I guess that's kind of what you're doing with unit tests, but it's it's not quite there.
I mean, because in unit tests, I think are sometimes, it's like, okay, so we're like, oh, we're going to do 100% test coverage, and I'm like, okay, on one hand, sure, on the other hand, it's garbage, because like I can get 100% test coverage and not actually test what's going to not actually really test the app, right?
Coverage is in general a lie. It's a number that can make you feel falsely confident, I think, about how covered you are. And in my opinion, they're extremely fragile, to the point where as soon as there's nothing about those kinds of tests that if you change anything near its domain doesn't break, on purpose. And maybe you need to adjust your tests at that point, but it seems like, to me, the chances of making a mistake, the area in which you can make a mistake, is now doubled, because you could have made an implementation mistake, or you could have made a testing mistake. Either one of those.
And like a lot of times it's a test, your setup's bad, right? Like even just like I've got a bunch of Postman scripts I throw at one of our APIs, and if I forget to set, we've got sort of like a check in the URL, like there's a GUID that gets passed in, and if it doesn't match the route, like whatever, authentication fails. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone in and just forgotten to set that, and I'm like, oh my god, the whole API is down, like nothing's working. Oh, but it's all these user routes. Like, okay, no, it's me, and so it's like, it's kind of like you can totally set yourself up for a whole day worth of like pain, because your unit tests are failing, or even your acceptance tests are failing, but it's really just because you're terrible at setting them up, or like you have failed at setting them up correctly.
It's not like it's easy either.
No, oh gosh, and some of them are really like, there are days where I'm like, okay, going in, like I gotta think through exactly how the shape of what this is supposed to be. And I think it's really easy to be like, well, it doesn't matter, it'll be just chance string. But I'm like, doesn't it matter? Like, so
I feel you there. I feel like, I do feel like maybe on the positive side for unit tests, especially in Angular, you get really familiar with what's actually happening. It's hard to write comprehensive tests where you're not like intimately aware of like lifecycle hooks and stuff like that, and what's actually happening in the Angular engine. So that's maybe a positive in terms of like, to me, the unit tests, I think line coverage is for the most part not all that valuable. But in general, those unit tests could be valuable, because it forces your developers to understand better what they just did, and ensure that this is what I intended to do when I write the test. And it's not, maybe it's not doing exactly that. And hopefully that results in the developer understanding what's going on better. Hopefully only the implementation changes to like account for that. But maybe you also have to like adjust your tests a little bit to say, okay, well, in this scenario, do this, in this scenario, check for this, and something like that. And it's there's value in that.
I
don't
think
think
of
it's
it
the value
as,
people think it is, like with the confidence, but there is value.
I think of it as like a love letter you're leaving to yourself, right? Or to future developers. You're like, okay, dear future developers, for this component, I expect on ng on init, this is what you should see happening. Like if you do this, this should happen. If you see this, this should happen. And it's so like a really well described unit test is basically your documentation, right? So like if you write a good enough unit test, you're documenting your app right there, because a new developer can come into that code and read through those unit tests and understand what's supposed to happen. Right. And then, so yeah, you're saving yourself the step of like in your README or, you've got a Swagger docs going or whatever, right? So
I just think there is a level of documentation going on inside there, but it's
also really hard to get people on board with writing good unit test descriptions, because I get a lot of like, it should return expected. Like, okay, so like, obviously it should return the expected. But, I'm like, but what is the expected and what are the conditions of that? Like, so
that's hard, especially I think in scenarios where people are trying to get to 100%. It's just like, I just need to get this branch. Like I am just going to write whatever I need to do to get this in and cover that. But I'm just going to copy and paste this and like these descriptions make no sense. Well, and in general too, like in the context of an Angular component, if I'm like going to write one or if I'm going to change one, I never start with the tests. Like they're always the afterthought, and they like I said, that value does happen for me where I'm like, okay, I thought this was going to do this. My test reveals it's actually doing it a little differently, so maybe I can help myself with that, and like understand better what's going on. But it's always like an after the fact kind of thing.
I did find I had to TDD some of my effects because for a while there I'm like, oh man, I am like just so good at writing these. I'm doing such an amazing job. They always pass the first time.
Nice.
And then I'm like, oh, they don't. It's because they're never running. None of these are running.
Oh no! I thought this was gonna have a happy ending.
Oh no! This is the other ending where you're like, oh, my false sense of security.
It turns out they actually were never running at all.
They were just never running at all. So yeah, I think that's the one step that it's easy to forget to like purposely break your tests to be like, okay, did they run? Are they actually running, or do I just think they're running?
Oh yeah, especially if you're like in the async context, it's very easy to get the false positive.
Exactly.
But
that's what was happening.
I get you. But effects. Coincidentally, effects are like the effects are essentially creating observables. So it's like it's essentially the operator test that we were describing before.
Yes.
So which is very cool to. Those are very, very well lend themselves to TDD kind of approaches, and NGRX in general feels like lends itself very well to that.
Yes.
But I will, if I could have a nickel for every time I saw selectors being tested with observables where they clearly don't need to be.
Right.
Selectors in general, I feel like people assume there's observableness going on in the selector, and it's like it's missing that selectors are just the function. So you can test it by calling it with some state, and then you can just like test
it's got the project function, right? Like the testing, the NGRX testing, like the testing module that they have is like that's like so amazing.
It's very impressive, the structure built up around NGRX and the way it's architected. Very impressive. Huge props to that whole team.
Absolutely.
Mike and Alex and Wes and Tim, all of them. They're all awesome.
They're totally. I like it because it's so. I mean, because I started using it. I think it was right before the mock store came in.
Okay.
And so that was brutal. And then mock store came in and it was like, this is so easy. Like, this is so easy. Like, and you can test it without test bed. You can test it with test bed. Like, it works however you need it to work.
Yep.
And like, and then you get into like compose selectors and it's like, wow, like compose selectors blew my mind. Cause I'm like, I can make a selector that like, if I have a component and I need it does is display data. I can literally make a selector that's like
takes in all the other selectors.
Yeah, like it's handcrafted for this guy. Like I literally only have to subscribe to the store once, and it fills my whole page for me.
Yeah.
Like, oh my god, that's amazing! Like that's amazing. So
no, it's very cool stuff there. I actually, there's like a view model pattern I follow, or I'm starting to follow with a lot of my components, where it's just like the one observable, and you just like put that up at the top and subscribe to that with an async pipe, and then everything becomes like there's almost no TypeScript code. It's just like it's all in your template, which is very,
and then you get like if you use async pipe, you get your on push change detection. You're just like set up for that out of like totally set up for that. If you use like if you are actually composing your selectors, you get memorialized selectors. So like you're not even getting like nothing's getting pushed unless literally the 5 things you want on that page have changed.
Yeah.
And like that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's the biggest thing I see in React that is happening all over our app is that like change detection is just running constantly, like because they haven't got it set up. Like they got it set up so like anything in the Redux state changes and literally everything in the app re-renders, which is really slow.
Well, I mean, that in some ways that's the downside of the pattern we're talking about too.
Yeah.
Like you could get really granular with these things to the point where in your tree for the DOM of that one component, it only changes when it absolutely has to. Whereas when you do like this one subscription at the top, you're kind of buying into, okay, just thrash whenever anything up there changes. And that's okay. Like it's not that big of a deal. Maybe it is for some scenarios.
I think it just depends like how big your app is, right? And like how much data there is and how much it's re-rendering and all that.
How often it's refreshing and stuff like that. But also like just trading a little bit of X to optimize Y a little bit, like significantly better, I think is often a worthwhile change. And in this case, we're sacrificing a very little, like negligible part of performance. And when it comes to front end performance, all people care about is the bundle size anyway. So like, what do we care? If that can make the way we wrote this component that much simpler.
Sure, definitely.
I think that's the big trade-off there. And I think that's one I will often make. So
yeah. Definitely.
Anyways, Laura, we hit a lot of stuff here. We're over the time we had set for ourselves, but it was really fun being able to talk with you and hear about your story more. It's just I come from a background that like went one way. I was actually, my first degree was in theology and completely veered off somewhere else. So it's cool to see
theology goes. I think that's one of my favorite Twitter feeds are like when people are like, "What's your non-computer science degree in?" And my favorite one was Master of like Tuba Performance. I'm like, yep, that sounds about right.
I feel like I don't know if it's your impression too, but I feel like front end development in particular seems like the island of misfit toys in a way. Like none of us started out this way, but we all kind of ended up here, and we're all kind of doing well. So.
Yeah, exactly. Like, look what I happen to be good at. Check this out. Yeah, definitely.
Very cool. Yeah, it's encouraging on a human level to see tech being that welcoming to people with different backgrounds too, and for us to make meaningful like impacts in there. It's really cool to have seen you making like really cool impacts, like talking at NGConf and being on the Angular show together and stuff like that. It's very cool.
Yeah, definitely. I'm totally looking forward to your talk. So
I hope it lives up to the hype. Me and Nicole, we've got something together. I think for the reactivity side, I hope I have some visuals in there that can really help people think the way I tend to think about the visuals. And Nicole obviously has awesome information about animations that I still don't fully understand.
Right.
I'm just glad she's there giving me that stuff, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I'm glad that you know about this thing, because I would just be like reading the docs to you.
I have very little talents, I think, in art or being able to create something that looks good. That's very difficult for me. I can I'm fortunate enough to be able to tell, okay, that thing I made is really bad. but
Right.
you asked me to make it better. I'm like, how?
Here, have them do it.
Yeah, where's my friend at? Let me.
I'm gonna phone a friend, and there we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
Problem solved.
Yep. Yeah.
Well,
I my art background makes me good at that stuff usually. And so yeah,
yeah. Well, I imagine CSS is a hard brush to paint with. Even I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Well, I mean, apparently for some people it's not, because I've seen some really amazing stuff. But for me, I am mediocre at CSS.
Okay.
And I am proud of it. I've made it to mediocrity, you guys. Like, I can center things where I want on the page, and like I know how to make it bigger and smaller and change its color. So
yes, just being able to reliably center something, I feel like is a rite of passage for people.
Exactly. Like, did you know I could put a drop shadow on this?
Ooh.
Like, I am so fancy. So yeah.
Very nice. Well, Laura, thank you so much for giving us some of your time, and for all the awesome things you're doing in the community and sharing with us, and your coworker back there,
Mr. Bones.
Mr. Bones. Okay.
Cleverly named Mr. Bones.
Well, yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure hanging out. So
yeah, I'm super excited for your NGConf talk too. So we'll see each other there. And
definitely.
Hopefully we'll see some of you there to the audience. So
definitely, yeah, it'll be fun, I think. So
awesome.
All right.
Great. Well, see everyone next week. Bye now.
Bye.